I just want to start out this video by saying thanks for watching, and I really do hope that you enjoy. Apologies beforehand, because I will tend to, I've got some notes here, so I will tend to kind of just look over at my notes, making sure that I just cover everything in totality. But today's topic is going to be about the Preachers of LA. It's a new documentary series that looks at the life of 6 preachers slash ministers. And one thing that I find is a bit unique about this particular show is that it kind of gives a more candid perspective of these preachers' lives, because I find a lot of the time when we see preachers, I think that they have a lot of control over the way that they're kind of coming across and the way that they are conveyed over to their congregation, to the people that they're talking to, their image, etc. So this kind of gives a more candid perception of, a candid portrayal, I guess, of who they are, what their personalities are like. It's kind of an insight that we wouldn't normally get, so that's real interesting. The particular cast members of this season are Dietrich Haddon, who's like a gospel artist. There's been some, well, not necessarily recent, but yeah, I guess you could call it recent, scandal in his life. Basically, as far as I can gather, according to what's going on in the internet and stuff, is basically that he's recently divorced from his wife following, he claims to be infidelity on her part, and then kind of swiftly after, I guess you could say, he began a relationship with his current fiancée Monique, and they now have a little daughter together. So that's kind of the state of affairs with him. And this first episode, because I think we're only 1 episode into the series, kind of looks at him trying to relaunch his career after this big kind of dramatic scandal and the backlash from that, and his kind of quest for forgiveness. Now that he's got his forgiveness from God, like, he's now looking for acceptance and forgiveness from his fans, and from, like, I guess the general public, and just to be accepted again, and then to be able to break out again into the gospel sector of music, etc. So that was his kind of storyline. And then we have a pastor called Pastor Wayne Chaney. Now, I wasn't really, I don't know much about Wayne Chaney outside of this, so it was quite interesting to see his story with his wife, Maisha. And basically their storyline is he's a strong believer, or they are strong believers in public displays of affection, and kind of showing that despite being Christian, and that to kind of banish the perception that you can't be sensual or romantic with your spouse because you're a Christian. So that was kind of his point. And then goes on to one of my favourites. I mean, it's only 1 season in and I've already got my favourite, but one of my favourites is Bishop Rob Gibson and his wife Lavette. He is absolutely, to me, he's hilarious, because he just seems so real, so kind of unadulterated. He kind of says what's on his mind. To me, he appears as very honest, and generally seems to have a heart for the people. He's an ex-gangbanger, so he literally has like a real kind of mucky past with gang warfare, and well, not necessarily gang warfare, but gang affiliation, and kind of all the things that come with that, drug abuse, etc. So he really has like quite a checkered past, and he's used that in his ministry to kind of use it a platform to reach out to those that may be in his lifestyle, or kind of from the neighborhoods, particularly Compton where he's from, to go back and to reach out and kind of reach back and like help those that are in the position that he found himself in. So I found that really interesting, because I think a lot of the time philanthropy can be people don't always take part in it for the most genuine reasons. But you can really see that he has a heart for the people and really does like care about the people that he's touching the lives of, and kind of has the boldness to go where others probably wouldn't go, for fear of their own safety. Like he does have the respect. Like from the first episode, you can see that he has the respect of like gang members, etc. So swiftly moving on, because I'll probably spend all the video talking about Rob Gibson, and he really has sold me. There's Jay Haslip, I believe his name is, and his wife Christy. Now Jay, similarly to Ron Gibson, has like a life. He's a skater, and quite a successful one, I believe. So with that lifestyle and from that success, it kind of took him on a downward spiral into like drugs and all kinds of different things, and kind of, I guess, at rock bottom he kind of realized, you know, I've got to change my life around, and entered into ministry, and kind of uses that again as a way to relate to people and kind of reach out to those. And his wife Christy seems to have that kind of ministry also, like reaching out to people and you know, trying to minister to hurt souls and lost people, etc. So their story was really nice. It was kind of hinted at that Christy kind of is having issues with kind of fulfilling all her roles. So that as a minister, as a wife, etc. So that was kind of hinted at, but they didn't go into much detail, and there wasn't really too big a focus on that couple, I'd say. And then we go on to Bishop Noel Jones and his friend Loretta. I'll explain why I call her friend in a minute, but Noel Jones is a pastor, quite successful one at that. I'd heard of him before the show, and he basically, his storyline was kind of the idea that as a single pastor, there is a lot of pressure within the gospel circuit to kind of, I guess he would see it as conform and get a wife and kind of pursue that. And he believes that in his stage of life, he doesn't necessarily, those aren't his goals, that's not his focus. He's happy being single and would prefer to enjoy the finer things in life as opposed to pursue a relationship, which is all fair enough. And he went on to say about within the kind of pastor circuit, or however you want to refer to it, he is often propositioned by women, and he does get a lot of female attention. So I mean, hey, but he was saying that it's a constant struggle to kind of, not necessarily to keep away, but kind of to keep it at bay, and kind of, you know, keep his stance as being single and happily single, which is fair enough. But now where Loretta comes into play is I wasn't really too clear on what her role is, because she's a friend. She was introduced as a friend of Noel Jones, but they kind of were discussing things that kind of made you feel that maybe there is the potential for them to be more than friends, or they've pursued it in the past and it didn't quite work out, or there's something more that's not quite being said, because I believe there's one scene in like the first episode where he's like, oh, something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember exactly what they said, but it was something along the lines where he was like, oh, sometimes either she or women in general want more from him, and kind of like him evading committing to her, and she was like, well, I'm not really that into you anyway, maybe you think I love you more than I actually do, kind of thing. So it was kind of like a bit of power play between the two of them. So that was a bit strange, considering like he was expressing how happily single he is, and she is supposed to be just a friend. So I really don't know what's going on with that dynamic, but it seems like there is the potential for them to, well, from my honest opinion, it kind of seems like she may be hanging around maybe to see where it could go, but he kind of seems more adamant that he's fine being single and probably isn't interested. But you know, he's not gonna, you know, push her away. He like enjoys her company, but probably just strictly as friends. So that's kind of the perception that I've got early on, but that's just my opinion. And then finally we've got Bishop Clarence McClendon and his wife Priscilla. Now out of all of the preachers, or ministers, or however you want to refer to them, Bishop Mackinnon kind of seemed the more, I wouldn't necessarily use the word flashy, but he kind of is the, from his house to his car, etc. He's quite flashy. Like, I mean, all of the preachers are doing quite well for themselves, but Bishop Clarence Mackinnon kind of seemed to be a bit more like on the extra side. I mean, some of the things that struck me from watching the show that I wasn't previously aware of, was the fact that he has an entourage. I believe there's a stylist in there, maybe security, etc. I'm not sure exactly what all the roles are of the members of his entourage, but he does carry one wherever he goes. It's quite controversial. I don't know. I guess I'll leave that to you guys to kind of mull over. But it was a shock to me because I wasn't aware of it, and kind of the level to which he rolls with them was a bit of a surprise. But we're introduced to him and his family and his wife and his two sons. As I said, Priscilla and his two sons. I think one's called Seth, and I'm not sure the name of the other son. The elder son, who happens to sing in his church, and the younger son, who they believe is kind of, from a young age, is kind of showed interest in taking on the mantle of his father and entering into ministry also. So those are like the 6 pastors. But yeah, now to delve into the first episode. Well, okay, so we started off by getting introduced to Dietrich Haddon, and he had a concert that he was organising with the help of Monique at her church. So basically, this was going to be like quite a big deal for them because this was the first time that they'd properly been back as a couple, like after all the scandal, after the divorce, etc. Like, this was their first public appearance to a mass of people as a bona fide couple, so it was a big deal. And throughout the episode there was a lot of emphasis on Dietrich really trying to be the perfectionist, so that this coming back was not a flop and that it was a full success and everybody loved it and the music was incredible. So there was a lot of back and forth with that, and they also explored some of the kind of difficulties they're having at the moment as a couple, not quite being married yet and having a child together, and kind of the logistics of that, like having to be back and forth, like him not having the opportunity to spend as much time with his daughter as he'd like, etc. So they kind of slightly touched on that, so it's going to be interesting to see like how that progresses throughout the series. So, you know, it seemed okay. And I think probably one of the bits of drama that was quite funny was basically Ron Gibson, my homeboy. Oh my gosh, he's so amazing. But basically he had come to Dietrich's concert and had also brought along 2 gangbangers that he had contact with and has been kind of counselling and talking to, JR, who'd recently come out of prison, and another guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he'd invited them to the concert just to see that, you know, to see what a Christian life would be like, and kind of the fact that they don't have to give up like fun in order to be Christians, etc. So he invited them to see, and it came to an altar call, which is basically a point in the service where they kind of reach out for anyone who wants to be saved. And Bishop Ron Gibson called out to JR and this other gangbanger to come up and just be like, accept God into your life and you can change, you can turn your life around, you don't have to gangbang forever, this doesn't have to be the lifestyle that you live. And so I was really shocked to see that, like, midway through this really like powerful moment, like, oh my god, like they're gonna give up the gang lifestyle and like reform and like it's gonna be brilliant, Dietrich Haddon comes in from the sides like, listen pastor, like you're gonna have to wrap this up kind of thing. I was like, oh my gosh. So after that, like Bishop Bob Gibson was speaking to his wife, and he was like, he wasn't going off, but you could tell he was a little hurt. He was like, do you know what? It was a great concert, but I have a bee in my bonnet over this little thing with Dietrich. So he decided to like throw this kind of like male bonding session at his man cave, which is like a house that he previously owned with his wife. And like he now uses it as like a male retreat, like for male bonding time, etc. So he invites all the pastors over, like to just have a little chat and like bond. But I think really the real reason he wanted to go over there was to kind of weasel some way of getting in his beef with Dietrich. But anyways, well, when they actually all finally arrived, stuff kicked off. Like I didn't expect it to kick off to that extent. Like I definitely expected everyone to be on their P's and Q's, but it kicked off. One of the first things that happened was, although this was supposed to be like a real casual hangout, Bishop Clarence McClendon decided to bring like his entourage with him. He said the excuse that he made was that because he had an engagement afterward that he needed to prepare for. So I was like, that's a little bit show busy of you, but okay, fine. Like if that's the way you work, that's the way you work, fine. But Dietrich Haddon came up with this really juicy topic, which basically was, in his opinion, he didn't believe that ministers should charge for pretty much sharing the gospel with people, that Jesus didn't. Like Jesus kind of made the gospel open and accessible to everybody, and he felt that finance would stop certain people having access to the word, and therefore that was unjust, and that as a result ministers shouldn't charge for preaching the gospel or ministering, etc. So I think there was a general kind of vibe of disagreement amongst the group, because I believe, like, I guess that's like how they get paid and how they've got as wealthy as they are. So I think there was a general kind of disagreement amongst the group, but the person who kind of seemed to be more vocal, I'm not really sure whether it's because he was asked like directly or whether he just felt the most convicted, but the person who engaged with Dietrich Haddon in the dialogue was Bishop Clarence McClendon, and he was like, no, I believe, because he in particular believes that when he goes to minister that his entourage has to be with him, and Dietrich was like, people are paying for like you to minister, like why do you need to have this entourage? Like you should just come. Like a lot of these people probably won't be able to afford like all of this, and you're excluding people by doing that. And so Clarence McClendon was like, no, like the guys that I roll with, they understand the way that I work, they understand me, so I need them there like to kind of facilitate me doing what I have to do. I need these people to support me because they get me. So okay, that's fair enough, but it didn't end there. Dietrich was like, listen, when you were called, when you were first called, you were called without an entourage, etc. Like you shouldn't need one now, like, and really went in. Like you could tell it was like a point that he really felt passionately about, which I can understand, like, because it is fair to say that like there are people that genuinely would want to hear the gospel, and maybe even from him, like, but obviously can't afford to, and would he be willing to make that concession? And he didn't really answer the question. He was kind of like, I don't know, like he just kind of fobbed him off a bit, like if people wanted him then they'd have to pay, and it's kind of like, well, what if they can't afford to? But it got too heated to really come out with a kind of resolutions, and like it ended up with Bishop Clarence just leaving, like, and in like the little subtitles it's like, oh, this is why I didn't want to do this anyway. So I don't know what kind of reservations he must have had about the show before, or what kind of maybe preconceptions he'd had of the other ministers before, but he obviously had some kind of reservation about doing the show, so that was a bit interesting to get in there. So don't know what drama might come out of that, but yeah, so he left, and then Dietrich was just going off, you're disrespecting me, because I think Bishop Clarence had made a comment like son or young man, and kind of Dietrich was like, listen, I'm not as young as you think I am, and I feel like you're disrespecting me. And it kind of went off. Like I thought everyone was going to be on their P's and Q's, but obviously the gloves were off and people were offended. So I guess we'll have to wait to see how that concludes. But yeah, like my personal opinion is I can see from both perspectives, because I do believe that Dietrich does have a point. Like but again, I don't know how Bishop Clarence McClendon runs his ministry, whether he literally does just charge for him to come out or whatever. But by the sounds of things, it sounds like he not only charges for himself but also his entourage, which I think is a little bit unfair, because if you're the minister, then fair enough, like for you to be paid for. But then the entourage, like as much as they may be essential to your process, to charge the congregation that much, I think is a bit it's a bit over the top. But I mean, hey, it's obviously a method that works for him, and he's still very much successful. So who am I to say anything? But I could see where Dietrich was coming from, and I could also see where Clarence was coming from, because he's like, okay, these people understand me, like whatever. But I think at the end of the day, like if this is what you do, like I don't understand why everything has to be just so, or you have to have this kind of laundry list of needs in order to just like to share with people. I mean, I think that kind of maybe losing sight of what primarily his job should be. So I mean, hey, it's early days. We may see more to him and kind of see why he carries out his ministry the way that he does, but definitely a very entertaining first episode, and obviously because we like a bit of juice, it was good to see a bit of drama kick off, and also like a not so manicured kind of impression of the ministers being put forward, because I really did think everyone was going to be on their P's and Q's and like really really like regimented and like, oh, like we've got to say this just so, and we've got to be PC. But no, like really they seem to be quite candid, so that was kind of interesting to see. So I think I'm gonna wrap it up now because it's getting kind of long, but I hope you guys enjoyed my kind of initial review of the season, of the first episode of the season. So yeah, so hopefully there'll be a lot more juice in store and it should be good. So check back with me soon. Bye bye.